On this show, we're driven by curiosity. We want to chart a path forward. Best people, best conversations. We're on a journey and it's just getting started. All right, everybody. We are live. We are back. You are back. I'm Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live Podcast. And today I have somebody that I've been waiting to talk to for quite some time, Larry Sanger. Sir, how are you doing today, bud?
Very well. Nice to join you, Jack.
Yeah. I'm happy to have you here today. Larry has been involved in the internet, the creation of internet, curation of information, well, big pieces and important parts of it, curation of information, the philosophy and the understanding and the truth structures around information, the internet, basically since the jump. This is, are you calling yourself a co-creator of Wikipedia still? You are that, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I in a tongue-in-cheek way, I like to call myself the ex-founder of Wikipedia because Jimmy Wales wants to be the sole founder. And so, okay, at this point, I'm saying, okay, yeah.
The right. Ex-founder. That is a funny play on words, something that you can't actually undo in many ways. And what else are you doing right now? And where can people find you so that they can get a general, just sort of background on who you are before we get started?
Personally, you would go to my blog, larrysanger.org. If you want to see the things that I'm working on, you'd go to Encyclosphere, just like it sounds, encyclosphere.org. And that is the website of the Knowledge Standards Foundation, which is a new nonprofit, was incorporated, has applied for 501c3 status. And we are devoted to creating basically a network of all the world's encyclopedias modeled a little bit after the blogosphere. So we want to create standards like RSS and Atom, but for encyclopedias. And there's really good reasons to do that. I guess we'll go into that. And the other thing that we are doing is for this, you could look at startthis.org as an example. So startthis.org. It's a microblog, but it looks a lot like a Twitter feed. And we could set one up for you, Jack, if you like. Basically, in right now, it just makes your posts look like a feed, which is cool. But we're going to be pushing posts from there to Twitter, to Minds. We've talked to the CEO of Minds, and he's all on board about like republishing stuff there. And the Fediverse, in other words, Mastodon, and perhaps some of their alternative social media networks. So that's, I'm pretty excited about that because it's, I'm getting ready to make more of an announcement about that. So without actually releasing
that's an interesting project. So if I understand it correctly, you've created an applet or a plugin basically in WordPress where you can post as if you're posting to Twitter, and it's on your site. You host it, you maintain it. It's SEOable. It's all those things, and it automatically posts to your Twitter feed as well.
Yes, and it is. So there's an RSS and Atom feed associated with your microblog. What that means is that like anybody could follow you and like see your posts. And if there were a whole bunch of these microblogs together, and you just followed those on Feedly, then it would actually look like a Twitter feed. You see, so but what we're going to do in the next iteration of this software, what we're going to do is create the ability to talk to each other via your microblogs. So, like if you have it's called a mini feed. If you've got a mini feed and I have a mini feed, then I could go to your site. And like log in using a self-owned ID on your website and post my reply there. And it would also be posted on my blog, on my mini feed. So it's a way to truly decentralize social media while staying completely self-owned and using an already existing technology. And the cool thing about it is that WordPress and well, RSS generally runs like over 1/3 of the websites online.
Right, right. RSS, something that we talk about here quite a bit. I've had one of the founders on, John Robb, one of the
Oh, well.
co-creators. He was involved in creating RSS. I've had him on a number of times to talk about the future of decentralized communication, networks, network power, etc. John is certainly on the cutting edge of those conversations. And another one of my very good friends who's been a WordPress developer for 15 years since the very beginning. He too is working on something very similar where you can control and own your own content that you are actually posting to these third-party social media sites, but it is yours, it is your content, it is search engineable, it can't be banned or erased or lost or forgotten. And Minds, man, I've talked to Bill Ottman, myself, a number of times, and Ian Crossland and the guys at Timcast, and Minds is doing a lot of really, really good work. They've just implemented the new Matrix, a decentralized live messaging system
Right.
through there, and through their Minds tokens, you can do some really fun stuff. So certainly check out Minds. They are on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
No question about it. So, folks, we have here is basically an internet OG, right? He's been here since the very beginning. He understands all of the long-term conversations that have been taking place, the ups, the downs, the pros, the cons. He's seen the history. There's no fewer people, nobody more online, maybe in some regards, than Larry here. So I want to take this as a chance.
Pathetic. It's true.
No, I'm the same way. I mean, I grew up with 300. Well, actually, I grew up in my dad's data centers when he was running, data processing centers for insurance companies in the 70s. I've
Oh,
been
wow.
doing, seeing punch card machines and stuff. I've been doing, dial-up connections since 300 baud, where you watch one character come across the screen at a time, and it seemed fast, and one person dial up bulletin board systems and telnet, and I've been there since the beginning as an expert user, but definitely not in a creator in the sense that you are. But I want to take this as a chance to talk about a philosophical or societal concept that you discussed in your book. The latest book is called Essays on Free Knowledge, The Origins of Wikipedia and the New
Yeah.
Politics of Knowledge. You can get that on Amazon.
Yeah. Just a second here.
Oh, you've got a copy of it? Let's do it.
I've got a copy of it. Here it
There we
is.
go. Essays on Free Knowledge.
Yeah, that's the review copy. Yeah, Essays on Free Knowledge, The Origins of Wikipedia and the New Politics of Knowledge.
Beautiful. That is awesome. So get that book, guys. And in there, one of the essays I was reading, you were talking about cultural resonance. And I wanted to get your take on what does this mean to you, cultural resonance? What was the status pre-internet and what did that look like? What is the status now post-internet and where are we going? And the reason I want to ask is because I've talked to other folks similar generation as we are and with this similar technologist background, and this cultural resonance concept is very, very crucial to the way they see the impact of social media on our society. And for those, maybe my interpretation of cultural resonance is like basically getting everybody pulling on the rope in the same direction. For like a positive force. So that's my take. What is your take on it? What was it like before? How has it changed? Why is this important? Why is this something that we need to talk about?
It's interesting. Well, to be perfectly honest, that's not a term that I used in my book. I can see how you got it out of what I did write. It's relevant, obviously, because collaboration requires, getting a basically a critical mass is the term that I and we used from the beginning of Wikipedia. Yeah, that was something that was totally organic back in the day, back before, I would say, between 2005 and 2010, the internet changed a lot. And those of us who were there earlier, well, we knew that it was changing, but I'm not sure that we knew just how profoundly it was changing. Um, it was possible for me to basically organize Wikipedia back in 2000 and 2001 by going to different mailing lists and Usenet news groups and online forums and just posting messages and saying, come and work on this project. That would never work anymore. That just wouldn't fly. So in other words, it was possible. So now that same sort of thing, though, is, as it were, automated, but it's automated by giant companies, corporations, and the keys to such power, because that's really what it is, are given out or restricted increasingly by the owners of those corporations. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure about specifically the term cultural resonance, but yeah, the whole idea of getting everybody together to do something that is really useful, pulling all in the same way in that sense, um, is increasingly controlled top down. And it didn't used to be that way.
Maybe maybe I'm taking a little bit more from what you had written, but I was fairly sure in reading one of the essays you're discussing the way that information sort of helped us all set a reality or an agreement maybe on truth. And then how
Sort of, yeah,
the elites, there was a cabal, a control of the information,
yeah,
and so they sort of controlled reality. And then I
yeah,
think you argue that the power had been taken away from the elites and sort of decentralized. And I'm trying just to sort
yeah.
of hammer on this notion because in my
Uh-huh.
mind, what I see is a top-down discussion of information and reality up until the revolution of the internet, and that top-down discussion help people resonate with each other, like come into like
Yeah,
a cohesion, right? And now with an explosion of information sources, people's ability to come together on like a single set of like this is the world, that ability has been damaged, even though I think we thought the opposite was going to happen, right?
exactly. No, it's really fascinating because, you know, the early days of the World Wide Web, basically from 1995 to 2005, it was the initial rebellion against centralization of intellectual authority. That really was what it was, like anybody could go and didn't without asking permission from anyone and just set up a website, set up their own GeoCities site. That was really easy. Or they could get deeply involved with people at all kinds of levels, actually, including some professors who would weigh in sometimes on Usenet discussions and so forth. And then Wikipedia actually developed out of that. So I know the essay that you're talking about. It's called "Who Says We Know on the New Politics of Knowledge," and basically what I was saying there is that it's a great thing that the ordinary person is empowered. And actually, I thought it was swinging, if anything, too much in that direction. That actually the experts of the world were being excluded deliberately from projects like Wikipedia, and for a time, I suppose that was an issue. But well, what happened though is that it wasn't like a bunch of academics that got control of big tech. It was corporations. I remember worrying if that was going to happen because I remember asking specifically um, and talking about this. I think with like Jimmy Wales and one of his uh, uh, co-owners, partners with Bomis, which is the parent company of Wikipedia, um, and basically asking um, what's going to happen when the likes of Google and Microsoft and whatever start discovering the power of wikis and the power of, well, we didn't call it this back then, but this is what it, crowdsourcing, right? What came to be called Web 2.0, and then shortly after that, social media. And yeah, I mean, it was just like a distant, imagining. Yeah, it could be really exciting, couldn't it? That didn't really take it one step farther. Maybe they're really that evil, and they're going to like really screw things up.
I laughed when you said Web 2.0 because you're right. That didn't last for very long. That notion came out, Web 2.0, and then social media just was right after and just sort of obliterated that whole concept. You actually touched on something that I wanted to ask you about, specifically crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
I remember when I first heard this term, I read some books. It seemed like the newest, latest, and greatest thing. What could be better than getting group consensus from people? I don't even think I thought about it enough to say from people I trusted. In fact, it was just like, how cool is this? You can get consensus through law of large numbers. You're going to get the truth this way. I remember crowdsourcing being very exciting. Where do you fall on this idea of crowdsourcing in general? And does that notion, as we thought about it back then, exist anymore? Has it evolved into something different? Is there power in the crowds in this regard? What is your experience with Wikipedia and all the last 20 years tell you about the power of crowdsourcing now?
Well, I'm still a believer in crowdsourcing. I think the way that Wikipedia does it is a disaster. Um, so there's good ways of doing it and bad ways of doing it. In short, the now you said that you thought it was really, you were impressed by the whole idea that people could arrive at a consensus and like create something new, which is the I guess the fable that people like to tell on Wikipedia, but it's really a lie. That's not how it works at all. They say that they're trying to achieve consensus, but it's impossible to achieve a consensus among a radically open group. I mean, once you're open to absolutely anyone at any time from all around the world, of course, people are going to show up who disagree with you on important things. I mean, how could they not? That's just obvious. And yet, Wikipedia acts as if that wasn't the case, as if a meaningful consensus is possible. But then, of course, what they say is, well, we have certain rules, and the people who participate in our community, they agree by the rules. But then they're just using the rules as a proxy for, ideological correctness, right? I can follow the rules on Wikipedia, most of them anyway, not the ones about reliable sources, but I can follow most of them and be as conservative as you like. But I'll still be kicked out for breaking the rules and violating the consensus on Wikipedia. So, and this really goes to show one thing that I would have said. Any consensus-driven collaboration, and not all collaborations have to be consensus-driven, but any consensus-driven collaboration has to be a collaboration among like-minded people. I mean, this is why, as we were talking before we started about Reddit, if you go on to Reddit and you look at forums about, say, Christianity, for example, you will find a whole variety of forums that are all pretty much talking about the same thing, like a half a dozen at least, reasonably large ones, reasonably active ones. But they differ in essentially their point of view, and that's a good thing. So there's a more academic left forum, and then there's actually a conservative Bible forum for academics. And then there's a real Christians forum, which is for, fundamentalists, I guess, and people who believe the Bible seriously. And then, of course, there's just the plain labeled ones like Christianity. The Christianity subreddit is actually dominated by theological liberals. But you figure these things out, and you go where you belong. And actually, and here, this is not really a plug for Reddit. I don't really like Reddit that much, but at least they get this right. They actually allow each subreddit to set its own rules. Wikipedia has one community, just one. That's it. And they set the rules. It has a definite ideological slant. So what needs to exist, if we're going to properly crowdsource the truth, to get back to crowdsourcing, is an open network of encyclopedias. So that's what I'm trying to develop. I and a number of volunteers are trying to develop with the Encyclosphere project.
Network of networks. That's a theme that we keep running into on this show. It's a theme of the way that we organize our social, or at least professionals and strategically thinking social media professionals, set up our whole system. We want networks of networks. You want to curate and calibrate different networks so that they can come into a coherence with what you're doing and where your goals are, and the direction you're headed. And something that you said really stands out to me is, for crowdsourcing, or working rather on collaborative projects that require consensus, you need to have like-minded people. I agree. Can you explain a little bit more detail why and what the ramifications of either side are? Because my first thought is immediately like, echo chamber, or you just hear what you want to hear, or I can hear standpoint theorists from CRT telling me, or viewpoint, standpoint, whatever, telling me that because where they stand in their experience, that is actually the reality, that they're defining it as such. So tell me about why consensus in a collaborative project where consensus is required, where like-minded people are essential, and both sides of that phenomenon.
Well, I mean, you probably took me to mean ideological, political like-mindedness. And I mean, that probably is what I mean most of the time, not necessarily in the case of religion. There, what the things that really matter are religious similarities. Otherwise, you're just fighting with each other all the time, and that isn't what you want to do. And then the other, well, in the early Wikipedia, we were all like-minded in one way, certainly not politically or religiously or in other ways, but we agreed upon the project of building an encyclopedia that was devoted to the ideal of neutrality. And what that means is describing all the different competing points of view where there is a difference of opinion on important questions, and writing articles so that all those points of view are fairly represented, given that there's only a limited amount of space, and you have to apportion the space reasonably evenly, and maybe in some topics it would be according to like representation in the broader community. Who knows? It's very hard, actually. That's one thing that working on many reference projects has taught me, that it's relatively easy to describe the ideal of neutrality. It's not hard to find examples of it where basically you can't tell what the author thinks about some controversial question. But it's really hard to actually do, especially in an open community. But we kind of did it for a few years in the earliest days of Wikipedia, kind of.
As you were writing, as you were talking, I wrote down, is neutrality practical? 2 stars circled with exclamation point, and then you just came on it here. How, I was thinking about this as I was reading through your stuff and
Mhm.
preparing here. If the goal is neutrality, and part of neutrality is showing all the sides, and part of showing all the sides is updating for changes to the circumstances and to the facts and such,
Uh,
is neutrality seems to be a changing, traveling, morphing, amorphous destination that can you really even get to, as you already described the limitations on time and space and
mhm.
manpower and energy.
Yeah.
Is it possible to actually provide a neutral statement on on an event that is crowdsourced? I think that's a key caveat there. But just in general, is it even possible to obtain the ideal that you're after there?
So first of all, it's definitely possible. As I said, we can all think of examples of articles about controversial topics where we emerge and say, gee, I don't know what the author thought about that, or classes that we would have taken where gee, did the professor really believe that God exists or not? I can't really tell, that sort of thing. Um, but beyond that, I can give you a couple of websites that have adopted, and I've talked to them at length, both of them, um, a neutrality policy that I think is like partly modeled after the Wikipedia, the original Wikipedia neutrality policy. One is called Ballotpedia. It's one of the biggest encyclopedias online today, one of the highest traffic, apart from Wikipedia. It's an encyclopedia of American politics, and they frequently have better articles than the Wikipedia articles on the same topics, especially about like local politicians and ballot measures and things like that. There will be substantive articles there that Wikipedia doesn't have, and they have. I actually helped to hire a couple of what they called neutrality editors for the website, and they're sort of like um, sort of interdisciplinary editors that would like help out other editors to edit their articles, especially on controversial topics, so that they look really good. Um, I was amazed at how good these guys were. They were both trained journalists, and they understood. Like I described, I like told them, read this long article. I've written the longest defense of neutrality in the sense that I've just described it. That I know of. It's called "Why Neutrality." It's just a long article. It's in the book, by the way. Um, and I told them to read it, and they showed that they understood what it meant in spades, and it's amazing. Um, it's amazing how hard it is on the one hand, and on the other hand, how with what subtlety the concept can be applied by a trained journalist. Journalists, we don't give them enough credit. Good journalists, we don't give them enough credit for being um, basically smart, being able to write uh, write well on a deadline and assemble facts that have not previously been assembled by anyone. It's a real talent, and the real talent actually beyond that is doing it and also um, being neutral. So, and there's, as far as like getting a community together to be neutral. So there's Ballotpedia is one. The other one is called procon.org, as in the pro and the con sides of an issue. Procon.org. Um, and they have a very lengthy, in-depth process whereby um, it is like practically guaranteed that that both sides of a debated question or in many cases all sides, because there might be more than two sides, are fairly represented. And it's my hat is off to them. I know the founder, and I knew the old editor. They've changed editors recently, and they're very good at it. So I would have you look at them. Okay, so then the final question that you asked was, is it possible to have a neutral system, neutral content that is developed by an open collaboration? And I think maybe, but you'd have to get those people to agree in advance to certain requirements. And I tried actually on the old Citizendium. So Citizendium is in the process of being relaunched. So the new standards or the new policy that governs the site are rather different from the old. But the way that we followed on Citizendium was, people were actually named. They had to endorse a certain set of policies. Neutrality was one of them. And if they start acting in a way that is easily recognizable as contrary to a neutrality policy as defined, then there has to be a process for getting rid of them.
Pardon Rosie's barking. It is that time of the day. Everybody knows that Rosie is a part of our podcast, so pardon the dog in the background. One last question on this concept. Is neutrality an ideal or a destination? It seems to me that if part of neutrality is presenting all sides, then one is trying to actually gather all information. And that to me seems like, and not to be, pedantic here, but like that seems to be a impossible task. So neutrality, is it an ideal or is it a destination?
I understand the worry. I would say that it is an ideal. It can be a destination, depending on what you're aiming to achieve. Basically, ideal is neutrality is relative to basically a question. So a piece of text is neutral with respect to a disputed question, and then you have to define in advance what the parameters of the dispute are, essentially. So I think that Wikipedia, for example, should be neutral with respect to the significant disputes within the English-speaking world, which includes all of the United States. That's just an example. But on the other hand, it doesn't have to be neutral with regard to like the leading theories in China in the English language edition. They don't try to do that. They act like they do, but they don't. They could not possibly. If you let the English language Wikipedia be taken over by Indians, I guarantee, and just like get rid of everybody else, just people in India, even though they're writing in the same language, it will look a lot different because educated people there, and I'm talking about educated people there, they think differently. They organize the world in different ways. So naturally, there is no way to create a truly neutral resource in the sense that the range of a dispute ranges over the entire world, all cultures, and especially all times. Can you imagine that? So If that's what you mean, then I agree with you. It's just like an impossible ideal. But there is, you can operationalize the idea of neutrality, and it's still very useful, and it's still exactly what we want too.
Right. Just because perfected neutrality is impossible doesn't mean we shouldn't strive towards achieving whatever sense of neutrality that we are
Yeah.
capable of. But it
Well,
should always be done with the notion that it's an impossible thing to perfect. So there's always going to be a problem. And you bring up an interesting characteristic about the sense making, is the term that we've become comfortable with here in terms of like trying to figure out what's real. That you need a certain level of expertise. And in this case, it would be American English language expertise at a minimum, right?
yeah.
In your example. And there's probably other levels of expertise that one needs in order to be able to contribute concretely.
Yeah.
Fascinating because it then draws into the discussion, like the value and who are the gatekeepers and who are the people making these judgments. I just want to throw this in here because I was struck by thinking about Rousseau and his, like, I can't remember the exact term, but basically he believed that the will of the people as expressed is the good thing. And if you don't do what the will of the people want, then you're not doing the good thing. And in this case, I could just see how the will of the people could be so corrupted that it makes Rousseau just look like a big dummy, if I'm even understanding what I remember reading about him correctly.
Sure.
Unless you have anything to follow up on this neutrality as an ideal thing, I'm ready to keep going. Do you have something else there?
No, it
No.
doesn't matter.
It brings me to the next point, which is about information. I think I remember there was a time at which information was valued, right? Information was valuable. It was like the most important thing. Remember, not who you know. It's not what you know. It's who you know. It was personal connections. It was connection to information. It was timeliness of receipt of information, the quality of information. Does information have value anymore? I'm beginning to believe that information has less and less value, like intrinsically, and that the value then now comes in curation, gatekeeping to that information. What do you see about that? How does that statement strike you? Does that statement strike you as accurate? What are your thoughts?
I think a lot of the information on offer is frequently unreliable and even worthless. But I'm not really sure I understand the problem that you're getting at quite. I
Is
mean,
that there's
a
so
lot of
much information, so many sources of information. Information has been liberated, things have been put online, entire catalogs,
yeah,
entire books, entire. So now it's
sure, sure.
getting to the information is actually the hard part now.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, I see, because there's such a such boatloads of information out there that the individual bits of information, even whole articles, are relatively worthless, and the premium really has to be placed on curation. Um, well, I mean, there's new relevant knowledge coming down the pike all the time because of um, uh, new events going on in society and new discoveries made in science and technology. That information is very valuable, and sometimes, I don't begrudge publishers getting paid for what they do, and I actually I'm glad to see um, some publishers like I mean, of course, there's all the old-fashioned ones, the Washington Post and the New York Times, et cetera, but also like the Epoch Times. They're behind a paywall. I actually subscribed to them for a little bit. I guess I didn't renew, but it was interesting to see, and I think that's good. So that shows you actually the fact that people are willing to pay, and these companies are, at least for now, able to stay in business using that model. It shows you the information, new information, is still valuable to that extent. I mean, you could say that what they're doing is curating, but no, a lot of times they're actually breaking news stories, of course. Um, so I actually think that curation is precisely the sort of thing that needs to remain democratic ultimately, even though making it democratic is very hard and is, as in the case of Wikipedia, um, I remember it was described as the democratization of knowledge. It's open to all the people, um, but as it turned out, it gradually became more and more closed, and now it's extremely closed. I mean, anybody can go in and try to make a contribution, but yeah, good luck in like um, keeping the contribution on the website. It's just not going to work out. You have to play their game, and you have to toe the line, and ultimately, um, yeah, it's like hard work. So the point is, um, uh, they have their own culture, and it's just well, it's a disastrous one. Um, so,
Is
I mean,
there a reason if it seems to me that Wikipedia's mind placement as the go-to source for basic information is that's the problem. All the rest of this stuff isn't actually the problem
yeah,
because people can form communities, set up whatever kind of rules they want, set the parameters to be whatever they want, and they can have the product be whatever they want because gosh darn it, we live in a free society. Now the
yeah,
problem is that somehow people, kids, common people have been convinced that Wikipedia is an unbiased, unvarnished site of neutrality that's just there to democratize information. But
yeah.
that's not
No,
true. So it's a marketing
it isn't.
problem, isn't it?
It isn't. Yeah, that's right. Well, I still think that it's possible to have. I mean, it bothers me the notion that I still that might have to um, rely on the editors of Encyclopedia Britannica to get the best version of encyclopedic information. I actually subscribe to Britannica, frankly, um, and they do a very good job, of course. Um, and lots of professionally edited encyclopedias do as well, but um, I really think that the broader world um, together has much more power and potential to represent the world's knowledge than just the encyclopedists. We just need to organize people in the right way. And all of those people cannot be organized um, centrally. It wouldn't work. They wouldn't go for it. They wouldn't participate. There is no single community that would work. So the kind of democratization of knowledge that needs to happen is that which is mediated by uh, neutral technical standards. And here, neutral is used in a different sense. It means that no humans are involved. It's just the passing of information according to protocols, according to technical protocols. And in the case of the encyclosphere, it is like democratizing the production of knowledge if we allow anybody to contribute to the encyclosphere. And we also allow anybody to rate those articles and publish their ratings according to standards in the same network. And then if we can also rate the raters as well. So we can say who the reliable Democrats are, who the reliable Republicans are, who the reliable, et cetera. And all the different ways of slicing and dicing humanity, politically, religiously, academically, um, by age and sex and whatever ethnicity. You can imagine rating systems going on that would enable us. I'm not saying that we'll ever develop this, but I hope so. This is what I'm working toward. Then we'll be able to actually say, well, according to the most respected American conservatives, the best article on the topic, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, is this. And it would be different from the one that would be, written by French atheists or something. And that would be, and it would be interesting to be able to compare the two. The thing that would make it democratic is that we're all contributing to the same pool of knowledge, and nobody is specially empowered by the system. Maybe they'd be empowered in other ways that the system can't control, but at least they wouldn't be specially empowered by the system to be like have their voice heard more than others. Gaming the system is always a difficulty in any democratic system, actually.
Yeah. There's no avoiding a social credit system, is there? Like a social scoring system. There's just no avoiding it, is there?
Well, as long as it just remains things like LinkedIn ratings of your professional expertise on this and that, I'm okay with that. I think I'm not okay with everything else, the moral ratings,
Right,
the ideological purity ratings,
right.
and even the criminality ratings. That bothers me, actually.
Yeah.
I'm a law and order kind of guy. Trust me. It's just that, sharing everybody's criminal record centrally is and making it available to everyone is not such a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And in fact, we can see the negative consequences of that right now, just in, Google is forever. You got something that could have happened to you 10, 12, 15 years ago comes up. First thing anybody defines for you as who you are, your reputation, nothing else matters. It's very difficult, especially if you don't know how to manage it or why. Something you said about the network of encyclopedias, I find this to be an interesting concept. One of the risks that we seeing in info curation and a neutral presentation of facts is that there's errors. There's errors in the neutrality. There's errors in the curation. There's errors in the facts that are gathered. I liken it, in my mind, to a hedge fund. A hedge fund takes on positions. There's risk. But if you take on a fund of funds, if you invest in a group that invests in a group of hedge funds, then you reduce the risk that any one of those investments is going to be cataclysmic or a problem. And in fact, you'll have multiple people taking opposite sides of the position, which should all sort of neutral out. So you're going to get those gains that you want. The network of encyclopedias seems to me to function to control for these risk factors in a similar way, in that you're getting multiple players and multiple analysis and multiple people, and then you're then aggregating them. Am I beginning to understand this a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think you could operationalize the idea of neutrality by picking a number of different categories of users, assuming that it was possible to reliably categorize users in the way that I described. So you pick the ratings according to people from or representative groups of people from different categories, and then you average, and you get the one. So like take some wildly controversial topic like God, right? And you want an article that is truly neutral with respect to the American public. Okay, that's interesting. So then maybe what you would do is you would identify the percentages of people in the public who are like Catholic and who have other sort of denominational affiliations. And so you would control for that, at the same time controlling for theological doctrines. And then, of course, you would have, other religions properly represented. Of course, there's two different ways to operationalize neutrality. One is to give equal weighting to like all of the items in the category, and the other way is to weight it according to population, right? So, in the first option, the idea would be the article about God would have equal weight in terms of ratings from Christians and Jews and Muslims and et cetera. And I don't know what the total category set would be, but it would look like that. And on the other hand, it could be according to representation within the country. And I think the latter would possibly be more interesting and would look more genuinely neutral to to most Americans, I guess, to most of the people who are in the group.
I don't know what this term really means, category error. It seems to me that this opens up opportunities for interpretation as to who belongs in what category, et cetera, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
So many possibilities for solutions, but each one of them sounds like you just, okay, that sounds good, but let's dig into that. Well, then underneath there, then there's this issue, and then underneath there, there's this issue.
Yeah.
If you were forced, Larry, into abandoning the notion of neutrality, what would you do in order to maximize your existence on this planet when it comes to information? If you are just like, hey, you know what? Neutrality is impossible. I'm not even going to work on this anymore. No one's neutral, but I still need information to survive. I still need to make decisions for me and my family. How will you go about deciding what is useful and real for you if the end result here for neutrality is it's impossible? I'm not saying it is. It's hypothetical.
Yeah.
But what would you do? How would you go about saving your life?
My situation. That is my situation because
Okay.
people are not neutral. The claim is never that people are neutral. The claim is that texts are neutral. People are, well, they're not things that need to take, equal positions on all sides. Yeah. I don't think that I'm more rational or more correct if I like have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, like an old-fashioned Wikipedia article. No. No, I think the important thing in any case is to follow a rational procedure, and to make truth your overriding aim. The problem is that when we make truth our overriding aim, we discover quickly enough that there are lots of different people who have different views about what the truth is, and so what people end up doing is using heuristics. So the left-wing heuristic when it comes to like scientific questions is, well, we're just going to the way to figure out what is true is just to ask the experts, and they'll tell you. And of course, not just any old experts, because they just completely ignore the fact that the experts do disagree with each other. And so what they end up meaning is what the establishment tells them the experts tell them. In other words, just the approved experts. So those are the ones that they're going to listen to, unless they happen to have like special interests in like alternative medicine, in which case, they'll be conflicted. Well, they're very conflicted, aren't they? But no, in my case, when it comes to the news, ideally, if I had a lot of time to take in the news, what I would be doing is reading from multiple sources, trying to at least understand what different sources were saying. But I've done that enough to know that certain sources, at least in my opinion, are systematically lying to me. And I so I don't read them anymore, and that includes the New York Times and the Washington Post. To be perfectly frank, and defending that requires it's very complex. It requires not just saying that they've got a liberal bias. You actually have to explain why you should care about that, and you have to go into a number of different examples of problems of where the bias has led to just mistakenness in on the facts. And so it's the question you ask is really hard, and there aren't any easy answers. There's one other aspect of it that I should say, and that is that if you want to be a good judge of the truth, which is really what you're talking about, like if you're trying to come to the truth and doing that by consulting a lot of different sources, if that's what you're trying to do, you need to be a good judge of the truth yourself. I mean, you need to be able to judge among the different sources. That requires a good education. There's no substitute for it, and it requires a very broad-based education, especially if you live in a democracy, at least a nominal democracy, where at least you're supposed to have a say in a lot of different widely divergent issues that draw on all kinds of different fields. That basically a citizen of a democracy, and this is what the founders said, has to have a really solid liberal arts education in order to be a really good voter, essentially. But that's just an application of a broader principle, that in order to have the truth and make responsible decisions in life based on the truth, you have to have exposed yourself enough to enough of the world that you are a reasonably good judge of at least obvious falsehoods, right?
Yeah.
So
interesting comment about the founders. I think they would argue that not only did you need to be highly educated and well-read to be an effective part in a democratic liberal society, but also of good moral and religious standing. In fact,
right.
we have none of those things currently happening in the United States. No wonder our
That's
liberal
right.
democracy is feeling the stress there. Give me a minute here. I want to take almost everything you've said here and put together and let you know and let the audience know what we're doing inside the Liminal Order. We have built a group of men, a community, 600 men, that is a high trust, high value community based on shared values. And our values are that we value the power of masculine energy, the power of brotherhood, and the importance of sovereignty, both personal, mental, emotional sovereignty, fiscal sovereignty, etc. And one of the things that we are is a sense-making apparatus. And we have developed this capability both out of need and based on who we are, in that we understand that there is just too much information out there. We understand that there's a lot of bad information out there. We understand that all the sources have their own biases and they all have their own agenda. And we understand that Wikipedia is corrupted and all these things, and Fox News and CNN. I mean, who are we listening to? So our goal as a group is to each of us become the finest tuned version of ourselves possible. And that starts by physical fitness, mental, emotional, spiritual fitness, and integrity, and unification into like a one. We work on our skills of discernment and our ability to make sense of the world as a team. We make choices and commitment and all of this so that we can embody our values. And we do this by collectively doing this, everything we've been talking about here. We have a common values. We source the information. We discuss it. We rate the sources. We have sort of a group consensus inside our private high trust with a barrier, a paywall, a vetting process, all of this. You can't get in unless we want you to be in. And then we all work
Sounds like
together.
a secret society.
It's a secret society, and I have the front door if you want to come down, liminal-order.com. And this has saved lives. We were way ahead of the game on COVID, and not necessarily about the virus, but about the government reaction and the market reaction and all these things. Way ahead of that there. We're way ahead on so many different items that the power of being able to make sense of this world that has got varying truths, varying realities, all of the curation is suspect. The sources are suspect. Even the most neutral, allegedly unbiased arbiters of information are totally corrupted and suspect. So I just wanted to get all that out for you and for people who are listening about our ways in the liminal order to approach dealing with these problems. And I suspect some of what we're doing resonates with your ideas as well. It's I think it's just easier for us because we're just trying to do it for ourselves, right? For our group and our brothers and our families and our communities. We're not trying to do it for the entire universe.
Yeah,
It's an epic project.
Yeah, certainly it has to be any such project would have to be restricted. Wouldn't necessarily have to be secret exactly, but yeah, I see what you're up to, and that's interesting. Yeah. It sounds to me like you're trying to do what churches used to do, frankly, but no longer. And the whole and just generally local communities, they held each other up to higher standards, and that meant in some cases that the lowlifes were cast out, which is always a very sad thing. But it was probably necessary, and yeah, I think it is sad that to a great extent our churches no longer serve that function, and that some people might feel it would be necessary to join an organization like you're developing. I can't say that I blame them. It's just that I would hope that something face to face and out in the open would be better. After all, you want, especially if you're at all Christian, you want to be a light to the world. You actually want to be an example to people, and not just in how you live your life outside of the group, but in the principles that you share with wider society. And so I'm not a fan of secret societies, to tell the truth.
Yeah, I mean, it's a secret society.
This is not because I'm a conspiracy theorist. I have to get this out. I'm not. But in general, I've never been invited to like any of those like Elks and whatever lodges, and or Masons, and I'm glad I haven't too, because I'm not the kind of person who would get into that. But I don't understand it very well, so I'm not going to begrudge anyone who does.
I was just going to invite you to be a member in LO, but never mind. I take it back, Larry. Forget it. Now, I have a question for you about your experience with the church. Now, that's an interesting thing that you brought up. I've talked about this all the time on the show. I just had Sohrab Ahmari on, who is a very strong advocate for what he calls political Catholicism. Other people will call it Catholic integralism. I've had many
like
people.
a church militant website.
It's sort of, but more about using freedom to do the things we ought to do, rather than just license to be, hedonists. And we've talked
Yeah.
about that with a number of people, and interesting that you brought up the church. My question to you on this is that through personal experience, or is that through other people's accounts that you have read? If it's from personal experience, would you mind sharing a little bit of that?
Um, my so it's through both. I haven't had a lot of recent experience in churches, to tell the truth. I grew up in the church, and then I lost my faith for 30 years. And I guess I don't mind saying I believe in God now again. Um, I'll say more about that later sometime, I'm sure. Um, and I have been to church several times recently. I just haven't found a good home yet. I won't get into the reasons for that. It really doesn't have to do with what I'm saying. Um, but I do get the sense from that, and from what other people tell me, that a lot of people, and this has been true for generations, are just going through the motions. And they do try to get a kind of inspiration. I think that's true. But there's a difference between being personally inspired to think about things in a different way, and having new tools in your toolkit and things like that, um, on the one hand, and on the other hand, having a relationship with other people who really care about you personally. I mean, that still goes on, I think, between individual pastors and people. But I think there's a tendency among people um, to play it very close to the chest, um, and just in the relationships that we have with our neighbors is reflected in church. You know, like, I know who my neighbors are. I know their names. When I have to think about what their names are, I've never actually eaten with my neighbors. It's sad. I've lived next to them for a long time now. I know there are people who do, and I'm glad they do. But I think I'm kind of typical in this regard, and I think that a better sort of church, the one that I would like to find, is one where I would feel like welcomed into a family, and with, frankly, everything that entails. And I think that a lot of people don't want that, but they need it. So,
It's no surprise to me that in a conversation with the co-founder of Wikipedia, where we're talking about information and curation and truth and reality, that we ended up talking about community. Because to me, this has been my answer to almost everything that we've got going on today. You got to get with people who share your values. You have to make a commitment to being better. You have to have a commitment to having higher standards for you and your community than the rest of the world is asking. And then from there, you can do anything. Once you have that foundation, you can sense make, you can build businesses, you can change the world if you wanted.
yeah.
If you are in a group of motivated people with shared values, I mean, that is living your life intentionally, and that kind of intentionality is actually the secret sauce for succeeding in any of the environments we're talking about. You have to be intentional in your desire to actually understand reality and the truth. You have to be intentional about the people that you listen to, the information that you consume. You have to be intentional about the people that you associate with. Then that group has to be intentional about what their goals are. It's no longer sufficient. There was a time, I think, even when we were younger, where like the system was what it was, that your mom could just throw you onto the little treadmill there and feel safe that you're going to get all the information you need and get all the right people that you need to meet. And just that the trust was there. Trust is
Yeah.
gone. Trust is gone, right?
It's gone because people don't share common ideas anymore. There's this massive fracturing of the culture, and this predates the internet. It's the whole bowling alone phenomenon, which is closely related to the fact that people they don't take the defining values of Western civilization, which includes Christianity, but doesn't just isn't just that. Um, they don't take them seriously, and so everybody is, I think, searching at the same time in different ways, and it isn't the search, frankly, that builds strong communities. It's actual shared values. In other words, conclusions, not the process. And that's, I mean, you, your community, I'm sure, is dominated by a certain political point of view and a certain sort of like set of values. Like you mentioned, things like staying fit and alert and well informed and whatever. Um, so that I think is what holds your group together, I'm sure.
Yes.
And the sad thing is, while it used to be the case that Americans had similar shared values in the same way, now we don't. And we know that, which is why, as I'm saying, in our churches and in our neighborhoods, we don't interact with each other. So it's possible to have like intentional communities featuring people who happen to think a similar way online. I do that too, right? I've been like organizing such communities since the 1990s. And yeah, I get a lot out of that. But local offline communities, um, I'd love to find.
Yeah,
But
and the goal for the Liminal Order is actually live in-person meetups. We've had meetings in 20 to 30 cities across the country, all around the world. Actually, we've had regional meetups, national meetups. We're doing a whole tour of meetings later this fall and the winter. We started it in June 2019, and then basically Corona hit. So we didn't get to jump out the gate onto our main activity, which was getting people together, the real in-person stuff, the irony, the boomerang of the social media phenomenon. Take me onto online communities and then all the way back into real world community. And this way I think is better because we've got a fishing line that we can cast out into a pool of people we know we want to associate with. And we do that by setting through content production and just themes and concepts and ideas. If people want to engage with those ideas, then that's the first layer. And then we still slowly winnow them down into the private community that you end up meeting face to face. So you don't have to just randomly run into somebody at a bar or a golf course or at the grocery store and then hope that all these things line up. Now you start with having the values lined up and the interests lined up and the worldview lined up, and then you filter it back down into the day to day. And I think this is going to be one of the lasting, most powerful things for me about social media and the information space that I'm operating in. Well, Larry, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I've gotten to think and be challenged on a number of different issues. Is there anything else that you wanted to get in here before we sort of lead this to a wrap? You've got a number of projects you're working on. We've got you listed here as let me just make sure I get it right, as you're the executive director of the Knowledge Standards Foundation. Do you want to just share a little bit about what that is for people and where they can find you, et cetera?
Sure. I think that would be a good idea. So you want me to talk about that myself then?
Yeah. Give us a couple minutes on that.
So encyclosphere.org is the web address again, encyclosphere.org. And we are, as I said earlier, we're developing a network or ways of networking existing encyclopedias. So what we're going to do next is run a seminar. We've been planning this for a long time. It takes a long time to plan, and I've been distracted by other things, but we're going to be getting it started pretty soon, hopefully before the end of the summer. And it will be at least 4 sessions and a discussion. It's possible that we will just have videos, but there will be a forum after the video is broadcast. And we're going to go through a bunch of relevant questions like, okay, what are the problems with the internet that are happening right now? What would a network of encyclopedias look like? What would a decentralized network of social media look like? What should it look like? And then we're going to get into the question of identity, because this is an essential requirement of both of those kinds of networks. Identity meaning, in other words, how do you own your own data? How do you own your follower list? And like, so that it so you don't have to ask permission to export the data or anything like that, but it's always yours and nobody else controls it. So there's something called self-sovereign identity. There's a number of technologies that we want to talk about that enable that. And it does get a bit technical, but these first 4 sessions we're going to try to make accessible to relatively non-technical people.
That sounds fascinating. Those are some of the very key issues. 100% maintaining your information, your own data. I've talked again about this with John Robb, the RSS creator, about this extensively. I don't know if you guys are connected, but you probably should be.
Oh, I'd love to be introduced.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's free, the seminar, and you can sign up on encyclosphere.org right on the front page.
Beautiful. Encyclosphere.org. That's awesome. I love everything that you're talking about. Keep pushing the ball forward. And thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it, sir. Everybody else out there, you got to share this to beat the algorithms. You guys know that they're suppressing my channel. Everybody says we're woefully underviewed and undersubscribed. So please share this, retweet it, put it on Instagram, send it out to your friends, email it, etc. That is the best way to get the word out. In the meantime, hit subscribe and all of those things. Follow me on Twitter at Jack Murphy Live, Jack Murphy Live, all over the internet. Larry, thank you guys. Thank you so much, guys. The book is called Essays on Free Knowledge: The Origins of Wikipedia and the New Politics of Knowledge. Thank you very much, and we are out until the next time, guys. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. On this show, we're driven by curiosity.